Morning, everybody. I'm glad to be here, sitting at a table with heavyweights. I'm just a technical person. So I wanted to just give you a little perspective on my position. I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but I'm a liaison to the U.S. EPA, and so that's the Environmental Protection Agency. And so I actually sit in the EPA office, and I have an interagency agreement, they call it. And so I'm basically on loan to EPA and helping them with their environmental risk and looking at ecological receptors. So it's a unique perspective to see these two different agencies. They function a little differently. The other part of this unique position is that I also work with the U.S. Forest Service quite closely because a lot of their lands have contamination on it, and they ask for the same kind of expertise to be on their land as well. And then our sister agency in the Department of Interior is the BLM, and so I work with them as an eco-risk assessor on interagency agreements. So when this panel came up, it's sort of like I could see all the different agencies and the way they approach things it's different, but in some regards it's the same. So I need to do a disclaimer right now because I took vacation time for today and yesterday. I'm not here in my official capacity. I'm just wanted to express my personal views from sort of the technical level of these agencies. These guys will probably talk more about it from their view. So, it was really interesting when Standing Rock happened because I heard different views of that from my community versus, how other people in the agencies perceived what happened there. And I heard things like, well, they were given the environmental impact statement, that tribe. Why didn't they just read it? Why didn't they comment on it? And now, way down the line, this pipeline's going through, and they want to stop it. So that was the kind of. I was so surprised when I heard that, because all these years when I would hear about consultation, I always wondered what different people seem to have a different definition of what that is. And my perspective, and many people around me that in my community, would think of a consultation as that the federal government would arrange a meeting and come in person and meet with our councils or meet with our TIPO and just meet and talk about what they're planning on doing or how to work together, just different concepts of how are we working together. And especially when it came to the consultation thing, when the Corps of Engineers and others are planning such a big project that's going to impact native lands, that should be discussed up front. This is what we're planning on doing and how it might impact you. We want to get your input on that. Let's ask some questions, a listening session. There doesn't seem to ever be a listening part. It's an aggressive approach, if you ask me. And so I think culturally, we have different ways of communicating. And what I see happen is, it seems so simple to me. Why aren't we just having face-to-face discussions and having transparency on what we want to talk, what we want to see happen? What do we need your input on? I always hear behind the scenes talk about, they're not telling us this, or we can't let them know this. It's sort of there's no trust there, and so there has to be a better approach to working together. And I just always say, there's all these, when you're in the federal agencies, we go through a lot of training, required training. And one of those training is working effectively with tribal governments. And it's just really difficult to read that training because I don't really see it ever. It's a great idea. Someone's trying, the thoughts are there. but when you implement that, it has to come from a cultural sensitivity, a cultural humility, and an actual, desire to develop relationships. And that's what I see lacking a lot, is there's a lot of people draw back and don't know how to even schedule the meetings or something. I don't know. It just seems to be a very complicated process for something that seems to be common sense and how decency and how you treat people. So that's my little spiel that I always think about when I'm like, what's wrong? Why aren't we consulting? And I wish we could do a better job at that. But I wanted to just kind of talk about successes that I've seen happen, because I really think there's a thread in there of kind of what I just said, of why it worked so well. And again, I'm at the very technical level, not really in management, although I meet with a lot of the managers for decision making. But the technical staff always want to work with tribes, and there's a lot of barriers. You wouldn't know it, but you wouldn't realize it. But the barriers are that we're as Leroy said yesterday, we're kind of in a we get stovepiped in our areas, and we have a lot of demands on our time, and so a lot of times we don't have the freedom to do what we really want to do for working the tribes, for example. We can pass some of that technical expertise and maybe make a bridge between the agencies by applying some of these, having working relationship with the environmental teams, and then that goes up the chain on their side, and it goes up the chain on our side. So I saw that happen with the ecological people in my group that I work with at Fish and Wildlife and at EPA, where one of the top EPA leads, because of his standing and position, he was able to get funding, and we started working with one of the Sioux tribes and helped develop their environmental department, did a lot of training, worked on projects together. I helped with characterizing the data and looking at what the impacts were, and training junior staff on how to interpret data. And that really went a long way. And they ended up, EPA ended up helping them get equipment through grants and things. And they ended up having a really dynamite environmental program because of that working bridge and relationship. And other tribes asked them to help them collect data. So it was this really great process. And what that took was, first of all, removing the barriers. A lot of people I work with, it'll be all over the board. No, we're not allowed to do that. You'll hear some people. Other people will say, no, there's a kind of, we can do that, and here's how. And, you can push the boundary maybe, or depending on your position, you can get away with it. So, and once it's done, once that success happened and people saw it, they touted it and wanted more of it. So I think it's really important, to kind of focus on what was that caused that success, and how can we do more of that. So we're also asked what are the challenges, and there's challenges on both sides. So a lot of times, for me anyway here, we have changeover in staff in the environmental program, or lack of funding in our environmental programs. And so if you don't have a consistent staff learning this stuff and kind of applying it, and you have changeover over and over, it's very difficult to get a really good working relationship going with the federal entities and your own program for that matter. So that's one of the challenges. And on the federal side, it's a lot bigger to me, because it doesn't seem like there's an understanding of what has to happen. And I would love it to come from tribes. When a tribal leader writes to the regional administrator at the EPA or at the Fish and Wildlife Service, that everything stops. That gets all the attention. And it's a simple thing that I would like to see happen, and that is, can we just sit in a room and can we all agree on what is consultation? Because I think the interpretation on some people, not everybody at the different agencies, is that we're going to send you a letter in the mail, we're going to send you a document in the mail, and if you have any comments on it, let us know. That to some people, that's actually what they think of as consultation, and that is not my interpretation, or many people on the tribal side's interpretation of what consultation should be. It's a government-to-government working relationship that needs to occur with transparency. So if we just started simple, I'm always simple, so it's the simple solution. That's like one step closer to working together, building a relationship. Oh, I just wanted to mention that the other, working with partners is also another way to kind of bridge this gap. Like the universities around Denver, the University of Colorado in Denver, we have a native professor there that developed a tribal program, where a certificate program in the School of Engineering with its stewardship on indigenous lands, and that the goal of that program is to have interns from the universities go into the federal, native interns go into the federal agencies and kind of become a liaison between the tribe and the federal agency as part of their student programs. It's a great evolution of what for their science, their STEM classes there at the university, and this is through a grant from the Science Academy, and there's full-ride scholarships for Native students. So I'm just wanting to plug that here in case anybody has any STEM students that would be interested in doing that kind of program. And that was all I have.
Thank you, everybody, for being here and turning out today. And I'm starting off. I'm going to have a slide deck here quickly to go through because it's a little bit more fun to look at something other than me. Starting off with while we're here on the Wind River Reservation, I wanted to start off with making sure that everybody in the room, all tribal members, know that from the National Park Service, you are welcome in Grand Teton National Park. And hope that you know that that part of your homelands are a place that we hope that you feel a part of. In terms of, let's see if I can, let me get this started, sorry. Hold on. Well, it froze up. Let's see if I go here. Sorry, guys. It was working in rehearsal.
Just give it a good smack.
Yeah, right. There we go. It worked in rehearsal. There are a number of affiliated tribes that we try to consult with at Grand Teton National Park, and have benefited from that consultation over the years. I want to emphasize, though, that we know we have modified what we were doing at the park. We have modified projects. We're taking input. We also recognize that we can be doing better, and we're looking for, as part of conversations here, as well as conversations and ongoing consultation with tribes, to continue to learn how and where we can improve. Part of what we do is we do put together a list of projects and programs that we send to the tribal chairman and to the historic preservation officers on reservations at least twice a year. We don't rely just upon sending that, but then we follow up with conversations, phone calls, emails, to ask questions, did you receive the information? Are there things that are of interest? Are there things that you would like to have conversations about? Would you like to meet? Would you like to come to the park in order to be able to take a look and experience things? Over time, for us at Grand Teton, by and large, a lot of the work that we have going on is actually renovation and restoration work. We're not necessarily in the business of building new big power lines, new big infrastructure projects, but rather we do a lot of restoration of existing facilities and infrastructure, as well as some infill. So an example of infill is over the last 5 years, the park has worked on implementing a new telecommunications plan where we are putting broadband fiber throughout the park to residences and places of business, as well as also putting in 13 new cell installations in the park. And through the consultation process, we got advice and recommendations and feedback where we modified how that work was done in order to be able to take into consideration feedback input that we had from the tribes in terms of addressing concerns. And overall, that made for a better project. And today, there's now, through most of the developed areas in Grand Teton, there's cell service that's available for the public to be able to access information about the park. There's broadband to all of our workplaces as well as to all employee residents. And so we have a better project that we've been able to do on the ground that we've been able to modify through input. Also through that ongoing consultation process of having that started with talking around projects, we have heard from tribes interests and desires to be working on other things. And so we've followed up on that. One of the first things that we've had is, as recently as last week at the conference up in Cody, I was hearing from tribal members concerns about having access to the park and the perception that entrance fees needed to be paid. The reality is actually is if you identify yourself as a tribal member at the entrance gate, you don't pay entrance fees. They're your homelands that you can come and visit. You are welcome to go anywhere in Grand Teton National Park. We do ask that you respect the closures that we put in place when we're trying to protect things like when there's a grizzly bear on a moose carcass, or their elks are calving, and we have closures there that are intended to be able to protect the wildlife as well as also to protect people. Part of also what we had heard through the consultation process is a desire to play a role and to ensure that that stories that you want told to the general public are being told, and that they're being told in the right way. And so we are doing things, a variety of creating new interpretive materials. Last year we did interpretive panels that were installed at the Pacific Creek Boat Launch that is incorporating native languages into it. We have more work going on this year in terms of additional interpretive materials that are being created. And we've recognized through the conversations that there are that we got things wrong in the past, that interpretive panels, exhibits, and visitor centers and whatnot are presenting things either incorrectly or inappropriately. And so as we are going through the process to look at rehabbing, replacing, and updating those materials, where we have heard the offer to be able to work together and to try to do that and get it right. Part of getting it right is understanding what is appropriate in terms of being presented in those venues. And then last, we have a robust collections program, and we work very closely in terms of the maintenance and the care and the upkeep of those collections. Grand Teton has a long history of working with tribal artists. Actually, we're in our 43rd year of hosting a tribal guest artist program at the Culture Bay Visitor Center. There are, for 15 weeks each summer, a tribal artist is there both being able to present their artwork, to be able to sell it. They also give programs covering a variety of topics. In order to enable that, not only do the artists make money off of selling the items that they sell, but we provide them with housing for the period of time that they're there. And because they're smack in the middle of the visitor center, they're constantly interacting with visitors, but they're also having daily, actually, hourly conversations with Park Service staff, particularly our interpretive rangers, to be able to help educate us and inform us about your culture. Also through the program, we had heard intense interest from tribes about the work that's going on in terms of the programs that you have to support your youth, to help your youth learn job skills, to be able to learn about your culture. And so we have two particular programs. We have a tribal youth corps that is a paid experience for high school youth that come and work in the park. And then a short-term Every Kid in the Park program. We just had this last weekend where we had 60 kids that spent 3 days in the park learning about the connection between the park and their culture. In order to enable all of this, part of what we do is that we've been experimenting with a tribal community engagement associate. Matia is, I don't think she's in this room right now. Matia, are you back there? No, I didn't, yeah, she doesn't need to hear me talk. I think she's in one of the sessions, but she's here. These are folks who are here for up to 12 months. Cameron, who was with us last year, after finishing her undergraduate degree, is back with us again this year working as an interpretive ranger. These tribal associates, it is an opportunity for them to be able to get good career experience. It's an opportunity for them to test out whether or not working with the National Park Service is something that might be of interest to them, where they might feel welcome. And they do really, really important work in terms of working on a daily basis with tribes, with the youth programs on furthering our connections. One thing that Cameron did last year was putting together and working at the request of the Shoshone-Bannock tribe to host a wellness trip, where a collection of community leaders, elders, tribal leaders, youth came to the park for a weekend, camped out. We were able to do a celebration of some of the interpretive exhibits that were done and be able to show those to the elders. They were able to take a raft trip on the Snake River, and basically it was a way to be able to develop relationships, as well as also just cultural awareness and understanding between us all. And then, of course, we're the National Park Service. We're responsible for resource management within the park, and we are hearing through our consultation the intense interest and desires, and I love the way that Jason put it yesterday. I stole his language and put it up here, right? The conservation of the 7 ungulates and the large predators that were here at the time of Lewis and Clark. And we are deeply, deeply committed to being able to do that work and doing it in concert with the tribes, with the states, with other federal agencies. We're also particularly concerned with the health of the headwaters of the Snake River. We operate in Grand Teton. We operate with the Bridger Teton National Forest, our interagency wildland fire center that's responsible for managing wildfire across the entire region. And then, of course, all of the challenges that we have in terms of learning about and attempting to adapt to a changing climate and what that means to our ecosystem that we all live in. So it's through the initial part of consultation that's around projects and trying to listen and trying to hear, where we have heard these other places where tribes want to interact. And so we are experimenting, and we're trying in terms of following up in those areas. And some of them will probably continue to thrive. Some of them we'll find don't have the kind of value that together we don't want to do. But we're committed to continuing to evolve and adapt in listening with the kind of things that we want to do together. So as I started, I'm ending with welcome to Grand Teton National Park. This is actually a picture of a tribal youth corps going to work. And what we hope is that we will continue to work together as stewards of your homeland, our national park. Thanks.
No, I don't have a slideshow, sorry, but you're all absolutely welcome to Yellowstone anytime, and hopefully we've conveyed that appropriately. First of all, great to be here for the second day. Most of you, I think, heard my comments yesterday morning, so I'll kind of focus just for a few minutes on what I think over my 30-plus year career has been a trend that or a direction that we're trying to go in the National Park Service. And I think with Director Sams and Secretary Holland at the helm of the department and the agency, we've got a good opportunity to make significant progress, maybe in areas that we've languished in the past. And what I mean by that is, as long as I can remember, tribal consultation's been a thing you have to do in the agency. And it's been one of those, and sometimes, if I'm being honest, it's been almost an afterthought. Oh, did we talk to the tribes about this? Is this something the tribes would be interested in? And I think we've matured, or we're maturing, and getting better at understanding that our responsibilities are much greater than that. It's much greater than, much more important than let's check the box and say we talked to this tribe or we sent the tribe a letter. And it's got to continue to get to a point where staff in the National Park System, managers in the National Park System, have the ability and the understanding, the comfort level to engage tribes on any number of different topics and in any number of different forums. And, you know, Faith, we had a great conversation with Faith yesterday in the afternoon, and I pointed out that we don't necessarily set up the managers in the system for success. And I'll speak for the Park Service. I don't know what the Fish and Wildlife Service and EPA are like, but I think universally there can be some discomfort with tribal consultation. It can be intimidating, to be honest, and it can be, you know, how are they going to react? How do I start the conversation? I find ourselves many times on the defensive about, oh, well, we sent them a letter, so that's consultation, right? I mean, and especially with parks, and I've worked in a lot of parks across the system, parks that have 1 or 2 tribes, parks that have, you know, 5 or 6. Yellowstone has 27 affiliated tribes, and the thing I've learned is that the number of tribes that a park unit is affiliated with is directly correlated to the complexity of the conversations that need to occur across the wide spectrum of different topics and issues. And we have got to do a better job of, as I mentioned yesterday, really developing the relationships, not just with the chairman and the councils, but the people like Jason Valdez or Wes Martell or, you know, Shane Doyle or others that are influencers in the tribes, and can really be resources and assets for us from the standpoint of direct communication that can help better prepare us for our government-to-government responsibilities. And so when we do have those government-to-government consultations, which are absolutely essential, that they're as substantive and meaningful as possible. And I think that when we look at consultation across the board, what I've found in Yellowstone in coming up on 4 years, is that, to Chip's point, a lot of what we do is, I don't know, I'll say routine, that may not be the right word, but it's road improvement projects, or it's, you know, re-roof the Old Faithful Inn, or it's any number of things that are not necessarily new, but they're rehabilitation, they're improving the condition of our asset inventory in one way or another. And what I've found largely is the TIPOs are pretty comfortable with the direction that we're going normally when it comes to those kind of garden variety types of projects. Where I think we have a real responsibility is to understand that not every tribe has an interest in every single thing. We need to communicate everything that we're doing. We need to do that better. But we also need to be aware that certain tribes have very specific interest in Yellowstone issues, whereas others, they may care about it, but they may not have the same level of interest that other tribes. And I'll give you an example. For those of you that don't know, as I mentioned yesterday, less than 25 bison in Yellowstone 100 years ago. We have really worked hard with our partners, including tribes, to get the population of bison, Yellowstone bison, back up to a healthy and viable level. That has been challenging, and many times you can try to discard politics and the social aspects of an issue, but the reality is that there are areas in which we're divergent. We have many areas of common ground with our state partners, local partners, and that kind of thing, but there are areas that we're divergent. Different resource topics especially. The Interagency Bison Management Planning Team was put together, and I'm gonna use this and we talked to a lot of tribes a couple weeks ago in Cody, as a potential model, and we'll get obviously the feedback and ideas from the director for moving forward with a better decision-making framework for tribes. But the IBMP has been a combination of state, tribal, Park Service, USDA partners. We have set a goal to not only maintain a healthy and viable bison population in Yellowstone, but also to reduce the number of bison that are shipped to slaughter, and to transport live, disease-free bison to our tribal partners, which we've done so, as I mentioned, on a very, what I would say, symbolic scale at this point, less than 200, but 19 tribes across 9 states. Thanks to the Greater Yellowstone Coalition, $1 million in an expansion project to improve that. Working with the USDA to get the Assiniboine and Sioux at Fort Peck, their facility approved as what we call a phase 2 facility, which would allow for bison potentially to be transferred up there sooner in the protocol, which would allow us to increase the pipeline of bison. Very positive conversations in consultation with the Assiniboine and Sioux, and the ITBC for that matter. And then we get a request for consultation from a tribe to deconstruct the very same facility is putting bison onto tribal landscapes, because that particular tribe feels that every bison captured is one less that they can hunt, so we're not honoring hunting treaty rights obligations. And so I point that out as an example of where even amongst the tribes themselves, there's differences of opinion about how we manage and execute on resource management within the park. And then you throw in there the states and the politics and the social aspects, it's complex. And so moving forward, I think we really do need to figure out what the right construct is. And that bison was one example, but there are many, many issues that we want to engage tribes in more formally. Obviously, we'll never get away from the individual government consultation responsibilities that we have, and we honor those. But it's also about putting a forum together to where we can have better real-time conversations about tough issues, especially when there's divergent opinions between tribes or between us and tribes that we can try to work through more successfully. About, I guess it was about 2 years ago, some of you probably saw this, there was a Smithsonian article and an Atlantic article that came out and was very negative on the Park Service and Yellowstone and tribes and what we were doing in tribes. And really, even though we set a goal back in 2018 upon my arrival to strengthen tribal relationships, those two articles were kind of a wake-up call in some ways, for me at least. You know, we are, and as I read those, I thought to myself, you know, what I explained in the beginning, which is the normal paradigm for tribal consultation. How do you take words, strengthening tribal relationships, and turn them into actions? Because if you can't do that, then you're going to sit in the same framework that you've been in for decades as an agency. But it's a tough place to start from. And the articles themselves were a lot about the history, the lack of acknowledgement, the lack of tribal presence in the park. And I think we really use those, or are using those, as a starting point to do better. And I think the actions that we've taken here in the last couple of years with tribes to strengthen the relationships and start to do a lot of things in the park are a start. You know, Chip mentioned this, I think all parks can do this, but we've done a full inventory of every single tribal exhibit in the park, every exhibit, roadside, wayside, in a visitor center, anything that we have on the web. Is what we're saying the right thing? Where are we missing the mark? Or getting something wrong completely? Who do we include to try to get better language involved? We've gotten 6 years ago a request from multiple tribes to change the name of Mount Doan. Mount Doan was an Indian killer, or Doan was an Indian killer. Very appropriate for us to look at changing the name, or recommending at least the name change there. As I mentioned yesterday, we're moving forward with that. We're listening. We're looking at, are there other names based on the director and the secretary's direction that we may want to look at and consult with tribes for change in the future. You know, I mentioned the Heritage Center that we opened up in Yellowstone. Some other major things. We've got internships. We've got a revamping of our education and youth programs, not just within the Park Service, but with our partners like Yellowstone Forever. The Yellowstone Institute is incorporating a whole-scale change in how they talk about tribes, who they bring in, including tribal members, to teach some of those curriculums. We're doing that as well. And so, you know, the thing about the 150th is I think that it was a good point in time for us to reflect about the history of the past, the history of the park, focus on pre-Yellowstone, focus on the fact that there were American Indians on this landscape for 10,000 plus years prior to Yellowstone becoming a national park, acknowledge that we have a lot of work to do moving forward, and then really build relationships that are substantive, that allow us to actually take the right actions together moving into the next 150th. Thank you.
Good morning, my friends and relatives. First and foremost, I want to talk and say thank you to Cam and his work, and to Chip. They are leaders within the National Park Service on how we can do constructive consultation with tribes. Their leadership is helping set the foundation for best management practices that we want to use throughout the system. And we're seeing their work in a ripple effect. I can see it happening in Acadia, and our work that we're doing there with the tribes in Maine. I can see it happening in Florida with the tribes and working with Florida. That work comes from a lot of staff who've been with the Park Service for a long time, who've seen how consultation has failed, how consultation has been challenging. Dorothy Firecloud, who's been with the service for many years, has helped lead and try to teach those efforts throughout the service on what true consultation means. As I spoke yesterday, President Biden is very committed to stronger consultation with tribes. Last year, as we all know, he reached out to tribes about consultation and told each of the federal agencies that they must update their policies. March of last year, we held listening sessions and work sessions and consultation with tribes so that we could build out a better consultation practice within the Department of Interior that would affect all of our bureaus. We are updating ours within the National Park Service, and we'll have those out for comment by hopefully the summer, July, so that we can get more feedback in to ensure that what we heard and testing what we heard on what does that really mean. But what does it mean for me as the National Park Service Director? I've been able to talk with the staff about it because we represent the executive branch of the United States. We represent those who are charged with not only upholding the Constitution, of which we've all taken an oath to, but also upholding treaties and executive orders with tribes. That means the National Park Service superintendents are a representative of the President of the United States when discussing and consulting with tribes. What I've noticed, and what I do applaud these two gentlemen for particularly, is that many of the staff, superintendents and staff in general, have not actually read the treaties that were negotiated with the United States. In those treaties, it tells you exactly what tribes have granted the United States and what they have reserved for themselves. And there has to be a better understanding of what those reserved rights really do mean. And I think Cam captured it very clearly. Tribes have some interest in some things and not others, mostly based on what they already know that they've given up, that they've granted the United States to take care of, and what they've reserved in saying that we have both co-stewardship and co-management responsibilities for. So consultation is about sitting down and not just sending a letter. Now, I've already, in my short tenure of 6 months here, I've already seen that happen a number of times, in which somebody will tell me, Director, you got a letter from a tribe. Don't worry, we're sending a letter back. No, we're not sending a letter back. Who is it? What region is it in? I would like the regional director at the minimum and the superintendent to reach out to the tribes and let them know that we heard them in a phone call and that the letter is just a follow-up to their conversations. Because it's important to have not transactional relationships, but transformational relationships. We've worked too long in transactional. I feel very fortunate growing up on the Umatilla Indian Reservation. I feel very fortunate growing up with a mother who was Kokopah, and that my first language was not English. My first language was Kokopah, and eventually I had to learn English. And I struggled with it by the time I got to kindergarten. Most tribal languages, most native languages, indigenous languages, are emotive. When you express a word, you see emotion. So, kusi kusi is dog. When I see that, I know it's a dog running through a field. But yet, when I was a child and they showed me the card, it was a dog sitting. It was hard reconciling the English language with my own language for so long. This has been a lifelong pursuit, which is why I eventually went to law school to understand how the United States uses language of law in order to govern themselves and govern the people of the United States, and how they use that language many times, not just defensively, but offensively with tribes. And what I'm wanting to do in the National Park Service, and working with the Secretary, is how do we deconstruct our language so that we are speaking in a very clear and plain language that we all understand. And to that end, when I wrote my 7 initiatives for the National Park Service, I did have to fight about using National Park Service jargon and DOI jargon in order to be very clear to the staff about what am I measuring and what am I asking them to do. When we do consultation, that has to be the same way, that we are using plain language as tribes understand it. Treaties are the law of the land. Executive orders as they were set up have to be understood as the tribal members themselves understood it, not as I understand it, even as a federal official, not as our lawyers understand it, but as the tribes understand it. And that is one of the basic federal canons of federal Indian law. But that is not necessarily taught, and I think both Chip and Cam talked to that. We are not doing the service that we need to do for the staff coming up within the ranks of the National Park Service so that they can understand how federal Indian law will affect them through the different parts that they'll work through in their career. If we can give that foundation, I believe over the next generation, we can help to set the next leaders who will understand what consultation really does mean for the National Park Service. The National Park Service is rather large, as you all know. 85 million acres, 20,000 staff, 25,000 concessionaires, almost 300,000 volunteers. There are only 2 other agencies larger as far as manpower is concerned within the federal government. The Veterans Administration and the Department of the Army. And so when we're communicating, and if we're not communicating clearly, when you have that many people that you're trying to work with, and then you count our partners and the tribes, If we're not speaking in clear English language, you can see how easily things get lost in translation. So the charge is to ensure that when we are visiting with you, that we will go back and we need to test what we heard to ensure that that understanding is clear. Now, we may not always get along because we do have laws that we are up to uphold under federal law. And those may contradict what tribal law is, which then we have to figure out whether it matches treaty law and what those differences are. And that's what we're really working towards and trying to ensure how we manage both flora and fauna within the national park system. I'm so pleased. I know that when I returned to Yellowstone several years ago with my family, and I returned and we drove through Grand Tetons, that yes, the rangers there at the gate welcomed us home. They actually said, welcome home. That's an important aspect that I want to ensure happens throughout the national park system, that we're welcoming everyone home, that every American sees themselves in the park itself. But tribes have already and always have seen themselves in those parks. So it's important that we welcome you home when you come back into your park and how you interact with it. And to make sure that people understand that we were never static. When I look at the map that they've learned, I think it's a great idea because you see how far it would look like tribes are removed from Yellowstone, when it actually, they made the trek there many times over the years. When I returned to Buffalo in 2011 to hunt in Gallatin on the northern edge of Yellowstone, I made sure to bring my 10-year-old son, who was 10 at the time, for him to understand that our people, and we took the oral histories from our institute, it took up to 3 years to go to a buffalo hunt. A year and a half, year to get out there, a year to do the hunt, the cleaning and the drying, and then the year to make your way back home. To understand that that's important and how we made that trip in a day. Hunted for a few days and then we're back inside of 5. That the stories that I told him and were able to bring was about how the hardship was, but also how that they stayed that year. Not only did they stay to hunt buffalo, but they stayed that year to ensure that the grasslands were burnt down so that the meadows would return, to ensure the species of buffalo were coming back, to ensure the plant people were coming back to life, to support the other tribes that were on the landscape and the other flora and fauna that are there. It's that type of stewardship model that sometimes I know that the Greater American Society forgets that tribes have been doing for thousands of years. And being able to bring that in, and that's only going to happen through true consultation with tribes, to better understand what their responsibilities are in that stewardship so that we're bringing those practices on and matching them up with Western science so that we can ensure that they will flourish again for generations to come. So, as we lay this out, I want you to reassure you that this administration is very strong in supporting tribal consultation, and I am confident that my fellow bureaus are also. What I've very much appreciated from U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Bureau of Reclamation, Bureau of Oceans and Energy Management, and Land and Minerals, is that they all want, we are meeting together on a regular basis as bureau heads to talk about how we're doing consultation with tribes, how we can do it better. Also, what best management practices do they have so that we start picking ourselves up out of our own silos to ensure that we're doing a much more comprehensive management strategy that looks at ecosystem function, not just species related. And while we may be talking about buffalo here, we want to talk about ecosystem function of how that relates to we manage all those species. But buffalo are a good indicator, wolves are a good indicator, eagles are a good indicator, but we must talk about ecosystem function and how the family of federal agencies and land managers can work together to ensure that there's a much more strong flow between the ecosystems as they match themselves up in order to protect both flora and fauna. So I'm very excited to hear your questions, and I know that we are open to hearing those questions and seeing where we can answer. I will assure you, if I do not know an answer, I will tell you I do not know, but I am obligated to go find that answer and get that information back to you. Thank you for being here today.